Hello and welcome to Man United, the Academy Project 21. This is a brand new show brought to you by the Football Masterclass and the HallOfSportz pod in collaboration. This is a show that me and you predominantly are going to be on, Ciaran, where we're going to be chatting about the Academy probably once a month, hopefully. Get some guests on here, like we've joined with Alan today. I'll introduce Alan in a second, but first of all, Ciaran, it's going to be exciting, I think, to do this show, isn't it? Because the Academy is in a great place at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. The Academy is in a real good place. I think there's a lot of interest, especially we were mentioning off air just there, that a lot of people are interested because of obviously Amad Diallo coming in. I think it started with Facundo Pellistri as well at the start of the season. So yeah, it's more interest in it is good because, again, you get more people talking about some of these players that deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, and Alan, same question to you, really. I suppose you're really excited about the Academy at the moment and how well it's thriving.
I am, yeah. It's been a while, as you say. Before the show, we were discussing just the last few years there was a period of maybe doldrums, and I think in ways that's nearly made this current period all the more enjoyable because having watched Man City, Chelsea attract the best talent, win the Youth Cup, I think we now finally have an under-18 team and an under-23 team that can compete. And often it is competition that rises your own standards. So actually, we can be grateful that City did hit those heights. And oftentimes, I'll probably get into when you talk about what kind of prompted this shift, but oftentimes it's actually a reaction. City nabbed quite a few of United's best young players. And a lot of things like that sparked United back into gear. And you saw that at first team level with Van Persie signing on the back of City, winning the league. And I think the same thing has actually happened at academy level.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point you make, actually, Alan. I've not really thought about that, but obviously Man City have invested so heavily in their academy, and they are bearing some of the fruits now, obviously, with the likes of Phil Foden and other players that are coming through that academy. And it's a shame that United had to react to that, but at the same time, at least they are now, and obviously, hopefully, in the next 2 or 3 years, United will bear the fruit. And you could argue, actually, over time in history, United have probably a better track record at giving young players a chance when they are ready as well. So if we can create some wonder kids in the near future, that I'm sure they'll get their opportunity at Old Trafford. But look, Ciaran, I'm going to come to you first and just say that, look, we've had a little chat there about just how well it is doing at the moment. But, I think sometimes people can look at 1 or 2 players and think, oh, they're amazing, and that just means you've got a great academy. But actually, I think there's more to that at the moment. And aside from the players that are playing in the academy and some of the great stars we've got coming through, why is the academy doing so well, apart from the young players that are obviously involved? What else is it about this academy that's helping it thrive?
I think it's an interesting question that you asked, Joe, because when we talk about academies, and a lot of people, when they look at it from one side of things, they look at the kind of results that kind of the under-18s, under-23s, and even lower levels get. And for me, and actually for United, I think it's completely different. It's about getting those players into the first team, and anyone who can't actually make the United first team is to get them playing professional football. And I was reading a story during the week that I think it was over the last weekend, there was over 150 United Academy players that had played over that weekend in professional football. And that's a remarkable statistic because you don't see that anywhere else. And that's kind of where I see it. It's like you look at all these players, and I can mention, I was kind of looking at just different kind of positions and what United have. And the one thing I always said is it was the same thing when Axel Tuanzebe and Roshan Williams were coming through, but were really highly touted as centre-backs. We always knew only one of them potentially would make the United first team. And we've actually seen since, while Axel's in the United first team, he hasn't really been able to break through, and it's really difficult. So when you look at some of the United players, I'd say it's probably, in terms of how well of a shape has it been, it's probably the best we've seen in a while. There's a lot of depth in a lot of positions. I'd say probably the weakest that we're seeing, only because we've seen some of the kind of older players get loans, and some have worked out and some haven't. It's probably in midfield. where we've seen we're seeing Jimmy Garner doing pretty well for Nottingham Forest, but he had a pretty bad time with Watford. We're seeing now Dylan Levitt's had to go to Croatia. And then you look at some of the players that have come through, and everybody's earmarking Hannibal Medjberry, which we'll talk about later. Puigmal as well, but again, he's been one that has got a lot of injuries. But you look at the strikers, which we'll be talking about, and there's probably 3 really good strikers that can come through. You look at the wingers, and there's a couple of good potential ones. Again, we're going to talk about a lot of these, but you look through the names, and there's a lot there. We've spoken about in defence with Ted Mengi and Deshaun Bernard, they kind of remind me of the whole Roshan Williams and Axel Tuanzebe. They're really good together. Both of them now luckily have a loan, and Deshaun's done really, really well at Salford City, and I've been really impressed with some of his performances, because it's not easy going from academy football where you're pretty much playing the same players every single week to getting to play professional. And he's won some Player of the Month in League Two. You can see Salford are doing pretty well in League Two and have the potential to get promoted as well. We're now seeing Ted Mengi go and play for Derby. It's really good that he gets to play in the Championship. We're starting to see this with some of our players. I worry when we end up loaning players at around age 20 or 21, because at that point you tend to not make it at Manchester United. But look, I think it's in good state, because there's still a lot of players potentially that can break through into the first team. We've seen 2. Well, we've seen 1, because Amad Diallo was coming in to play for the first team. Yeah. But Shola, when he came in, it's been really, really good to see him come through. He only turned 17, got his professional contract, and has already got his Premier League debut. So when you see that happening, and you see there's other players within that under 18s and under 23s that you expect to make the first team and to get chances over the next 2 to 3 years, that's really what it's about. It's the academy is there to produce for the first team, and it's also there to produce for the players that are in the academy, to allow them to go on and so they can have a career in professional football. Well, I think other academies that we've seen, and we mentioned City, that they spent a lot of money and reinvested, but there's not loads of City players that are playing all around England or abroad. We see a couple that have kind of sprinkled in here or there, but I think it comes down to kind of the culture or kind of what the club wants to do with their academy. And I think United have kind of hit the right note.
Yeah, no, fantastic points. I tend to agree. But Alan, what I want to touch on with you is, obviously we know that we've got a special bunch of kids on our hand here, it seems, in the academy. But in terms of its resurgence in the last couple of years and where it's at the moment, I want to sort of move away from the players and just look at, has there been a change of structure maybe from the top down, in terms of looking at the people who are running the academy nowadays, the people who are involved in the coaching setup as well? How much credit has to go to those guys as much as obviously the players are doing well?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 points there. I think success sometimes can breed some kind of complacency, and competition can breed then the opposite. You know, it sparks you into action. I think we saw that because up until, you know, you saw back, if you stretch it back to the 90s, obviously Ferguson came in, he saw that there was an opportunity to, you know, that he really needed to rebuild from the ground up. So he really identified academies, scouted at that level, got the best young players in the country, and they had great success. But then from the year 2000 onwards, I suppose that success bred that kind of complacency. Abramovich came in, and the investment that they pumped into youth was on a different scale. Yeah. So Chelsea then went on to have obviously a number of successful sides, but as Ciaran points out, it's one thing having a successful team, it's another thing actually bringing those players through. And I would say United actually probably brought more players through in the following 10 years. However, what's happened since is Man City have then kind of upped the stakes even more. And now you go, and where maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago when Ferguson came in, where United were the obvious choice for players to join, that's not the case anymore. You have Man City who are offering players a scholarship into the best private school in the Northwest. Chelsea obviously pay very, very well. Liverpool have recruited very well on academy level. They've beat United to 3 young players recently. So it's the competition is greater, but what that has led to, as I say, has been this spark into action. I think the biggest turning point, really, and Ed Woodward deserves a lot of credit for this, was in about 2013, 2014. I think Man City deserve a lot of credit as well, even if they didn't realise it at the time. But they were leaking a lot of information. They were nabbing a lot of United kids. They were leaking a lot of information about their under-7s winning 9-0 and so on and so forth. And there was an article by James Ducker. I don't know if either of you read it, but it was entitled Man City Academy Stumbles Across Mind-Blowing Talent. And the article focused on a 13-year-old that Man City had signed from United, James McAtee. And the article compared him to Ryan Giggs. They were saying how, scouts once in a generation stumble across some kind of gold mine, effectively, implying that this kid is going to be the next best thing. Now, did that have the best interest of the player at heart? No, it didn't. It was basically sticking the knife into United because A, they took the player from him, and B, they were trying to rub it in. And to be fair, there was lots of points in the article. I had been watching Jadon Sancho's age group at the time. Sancho was still at City, and he was on the same youth team as Phil Foden and Ian Poveda and a few others. It was a really good team. And they touched on how good that team was, which is fair enough. But they also they talked up some other players. City had nabbed another guy, Alex Robertson, Noah Hyo. They were both originally with the United Academy. Interestingly enough, now McAtee is done quite well. I'd say he's probably of the under-23 players that have played against United this year, he's probably been the most impressive. But 18, and he hasn't been in and around the first team at City, so it's debatable whether he will make it. Brahim Diaz, another one that was talked up in that article, he's left. Sancho has left. So their tactics was debatable, but where it's benefited United is all of these things. I'd say if it was Chelsea that these articles were being put out about, there would have been less of an issue made of it at United. But because it was their neighbours, it's not a good image, losing your players to City. And so there was a big reaction. United nicked a couple of players back from City. Mipo Adebeko, who is now at West Ham. Deji Satona. United nicked a few academy staff and scouts.
Yeah.
And I think Woodward identified that we need to have more of a budget in line with what City and Chelsea are spending. And that's where you see, the fees in the last few years, you saw 10 million potential fee for Mejbri, quite a high fee for Emeran. Kambuala is potentially £4 million for 16-year-olds. So there's a bigger budget now. The coaching staff there's been a big juggling in terms of that, a refresh. Ciaran McKenna, who's now obviously on Ole's staff, was under 18 coach and had that team playing exceptional football. So yeah, in ways, it's funny how things work out. But to go back to my first point, it's that competition which has sparked United into action.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you make because, I don't watch the academy as avidly as probably as you guys do. So my level of knowledge is probably not as high, but I started to see the shift when we brought Ciaran McKenna in. I think I've said to you before, Ciaran, on the show that I think Jose Mourinho was probably the first team coach, the first team manager at the time. And I remember him saying something about he thought United had signed one of the best young coaches in the country. And I think at that point, everyone started looking at the 18 and they were playing some fantastic football, and rightly so. Then Ciaran was moved up. I think he was at Spurs before he came to United. Is that right? And obviously,
he was.
He was doing good things with the Spurs academy. And that's what I want to ask you, Ciaran. Like I said, as good as obviously that we've changed the infrastructure, as Alan's pointed out there in great detail, and we've obviously recruited very well. What's to be said about the coaching as well, do you think, at the moment in the current setup?
Yeah, I think that it goes to actually one of Alan's points that in terms of the budget for the academy, United used to have basically the budget was kind of put all together for United in terms of recruitment, but now you see it separate. That they're trying to improve the coaching, the infrastructure around the academy system because they see it now and just how important it is. And one thing I think that we have to think about is it kind of coincided with a lot of these transfer fees going absolutely astronomical, where we saw Neymar leaving for whatever it was, 100 or 200 million, same with Mbappe and the likes. And they've seen now just how important it can be for you to actually be able to bring in these players while they're young. Okay, go pay 10 million for Hannibal Medjberry, but if Hannibal Medjberry becomes kind of that next midfielder that is 70, 80, 90 million, you've saved yourself a whole lot of money, and you've also developed them into the style that you want them to play in. Like, it's a really interesting point. And I go back to it, and some of the points that Alan made were really, really good, and it's really hard to explain just how good and then how bad the academy became. So basically, I'll give you a couple of points that kind of shocked me when you actually read about what happened. Is that basically after Brian McNeill left in 2015, United went a whole year without having a head of the academy. Now, think about that. One of the top clubs in the Premier League going a whole year without having somebody actually running the academy. It seems like it's ridiculous. It's the same thing that happened when Alex Ferguson left, where a lot of the scouts, they retired at the same time as Alex Ferguson, and United didn't replace them. And it's a really big problem. Now, luckily they brought in Nicky Butt, and they brought in Nick Cox now, who was initially from Sheffield United, he was excellent at his job, and it's been revitalized, and we've seen the recruitment that's come in since. But I think one of the things that really goes in with what Alan said, that whole point about Manchester City, the biggest kick in the teeth is when one of your former players, when their sons go to Manchester City and they don't go to Manchester United. Now, we've seen the opposite happen again now, where you see Harvey Neville, who's come back to Manchester United, but he was put into the Manchester City academy because they had better infrastructure. They were giving more to the players, and that just shows you just how bad it was, because it wasn't just Harvey Neville. It was happening for a lot of players that their parents had ties to Manchester United, but they were sending them to Manchester City, and that's a big issue. And you have to give Ed Woodward a bit of credit that he saw what was happening, and okay, maybe it was because City were kind of pushing them into it, but they did change. And now you look at them, and you actually look at the academy, and it's really, really good. And that's, you have to give a lot of credit to the people that are in charge now. You look at it now, they're kind of one of the higher teams when you look at their recruitment model, because you can look at Hannibal Medjberry from Monaco, and the likes of Arsenal, Liverpool, Barcelona were all interested in him. You had Dylan Hugill from Ajax. Again, a lot of people were interested in him. And we saw it with this summer, like the biggest one, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, is with Joe Hugill, is that it was very close that he was going to go to Tottenham. It was really close. But the allure of Manchester United was able to actually get the deal done. And the way he's playing, 300,000, because he was basically he was getting to the age where they had to offer him a professional contract. It's an absolute bargain, because I think anybody watching him can say he should definitely be making into the first team squad. I think if we were in a normal world, I would have said that when we went on our tour, which we'd normally do in the summer, he would have been a player that probably would have got brought on. With COVID, you don't know. It's probably a little bit later. You even have to just look at Charlie McNeill, who left United, where he was great for the United Academy when he's really young, goes to City, and I know there's the story of him scoring the 600 goals. That might be a little bit like Pele scoring all the goals that he scored, but it's one of those that he's now come back, and you've seen the type of striker that he is as well. And it just shows that if you take your mind off the ball for a couple of years, it can be disastrous. Where we've seen City come through with, look, City were able to get Jadon Sancho from Watford. Now, if they were a little bit smarter in how they dealt with Jadon Sancho when he was ready to play in the first team, look at the player they would have had right now.
Yeah.
And we've seen it with Phil Foden. Luckily, he wanted to stick it out with Manchester City. He did, and they're kind of reaping the benefits there. But it shows just how important it is that the structure in your academy is correct, and also their recruitment is correct.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. And I think everything about football is about timing, isn't it? And obviously, City did miss the boat with Sancho because, you look at that position now, and if they'd have given him the opportunities that Dortmund had given him, which they could have really, City, with the wealth of options that they've got, there's no real excuse for not giving Sancho more games and stuff when he was younger, because if it doesn't work out, they'd always have options on the bench to replace him anyway, wouldn't they? So, it does surprise me, but I think that's another great point you make as well earlier, Ciaran, that we didn't have a pre-season tour this year. We know a lot of these guys would have gone on that tour. That would have meant that Ollie would have had more chance to sort of work with some of these boys. And you could argue we might have seen some of them in the squads even earlier than what we have. And, that's what I want to move on to now. And I want to sort of move on to look at some of the young players that are in the academy and that are around the first team. And obviously, in the last week or so, we've seen Ahmed obviously made his debut on Thursday in the Europa League. I won't talk too much about Ahmed because, like Ciaran said, he was bought more to be a first-team player anyway. But obviously, on Sunday, we saw Shola Shoretire. I think I'm pronouncing it right. I've seen about 3 different pronunciations of his name, so I hope I'm getting it right. Shoretire is what I'm going to go with. And first of all, I think what I want to ask you, Alan, is obviously someone who follows the academy. Did you think that Shola would probably be the first to make that sort of step up, that path into the first team? I mean, I'm looking here, he's played 16 games, scored 6 goals, 3 assists. And to be fair, there are other players who have played in the under-23s this season with similar stats. But obviously, Shola was the one that United have decided to move up first. First of all, first question to you is, are you surprised that Shola is the first from that academy to make his debut in the first team?
I was, to be honest. I don't think he's ready. I think he was given his debut probably more as recognition. The game was up. Recognition that the club believe in him, similar to Angel Gomez being given his debut at 16. Obviously, it didn't ultimately work out for Gomez, but the club obviously believes in him. Gomez, similar to Shoretire, wasn't physically ready, hadn't built up enough games probably at under 23 level. For me, a player who has to be, or who is ready for first team football, is one who is dominating under 23 matches. And I think Shoretire, the early part of the season, struggled a bit at under 23 level, which is normal because he was 16 for the bulk of the season. He only recently turned 17. Now, a couple of his games recently, he's been very, very good. I think he was probably United's best player in their last 2 games. But I think, as I say, it's probably him being given the minutes is more recognition for the belief they have in his long-term potential, more so than him going to get a run of games from now to the end of the season. But I think just a couple of things on him. It's very hard to judge a player when he's playing so far up. And Shoretire has always played so far up above his age group. At under 18s, he made his debut at 15. And he only played 1 season, which is very rare. It's rare for a guy to move up to 23s after 1 season at under 18s. But again, it shows the belief that the club have in him. But when he has played at his own age group, at under 15 level, he scored 66 goals. And on his English under 15 debut, he scored a hat-trick in 15 minutes and got taken off because the coaches felt he was, running amok and too good and embarrassing for the opposition, effectively. Yeah. So that's the talent that he has. And I think what's interesting too is he has a younger brother. So I think as well, the club are trying to play their cards right, I would imagine, with the family, because, you want to keep them on side. The younger brother is supposedly a very, very good talent as well. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, United brought Matthew Willock in. I think part of that whole process was because they were trying to get Chris and Joe as well. Again, it was a family dynamic. We may see something similar with Bellingham. Joe Bellingham has been linked to United, and it may pave a way to Jude eventually, or vice versa, whatever way it works. Well, I think the family dynamic is interesting. I think that United are keen to keep, it was the first player I've ever seen sign a professional contract and have the manager sit right beside them. That's testament to how much belief they have in Shoretire, but also they want to keep the family on side and whoever represents him. So, but in terms of his readiness, I think we'll see him on a 23 level for the rest of the season. He may go on the pre-season tour if there is one. And then, he'll be drip-fed opportunities here and there, I think, from then on.
That's a really interesting point you make, because, look, I'm quite old, Alan, but I'm going back to 1992 and I'm thinking, obviously, Gary Neville coming through, and then obviously similar with with Phil, obviously, later on. I don't know if there's a similar situation there. We saw, obviously, as we move through the years, we had the Keane brothers as well, didn't we? Will and obviously Michael. I don't know if, again, whether there was a similar sort of situation going on there. But yeah, Ciaran, I'll ask you a similar question in terms of when you look at that under-23 side, were you surprised that maybe, Shola got the nod first? Because you put some stats together the other night, Ciaran. I'm just looking at them here now. You've got Joe Hugill, who's played the same amount of games, scored 4 more goals, two assists. You've got Anthony Elanga, who's also played the same amount of goals, 2 more goals than Shoretire with 3 assists. Hannibal's been very impressive as well. Are you surprised that obviously that, like Alan, that Shola was the first to get the nod?
Yeah, I was really surprised. But then when I think back of what happened, was that he was brought up the same time as Amad Diallo, pretty much. I know Amad was training with the first team for a while, but he got brought up, I think, what was it, maybe 10 days ago to 2 weeks ago, along with, they were supposed to be bringing up Hannibal Medjberry as well, but then he got an arm injury in, I think it wasn't the last under-23s game, it was the one prior, and he's been out injured since. So I think the plan was to bring the players up that deserved it from the under-23s into the first team to at least train, which was a little bit surprising that they didn't bring up Joe Hugill up to the first team just to train with them, because, again, you look at who we were missing the last week, and the likes of Edison Cavani was out. And look, when Cavani and Van de Beek come back, you won't see Shola in coming in on the matchday squad. I think it was kind of a good timing, as you mentioned before, Joe. Signs his new deal, has a really good game for the under-23s. Some players get injured in the first team. Ollie, he said it before, he wants to bring players from the under-23s up to train with the first team at least. You then go to Sociedad and it becomes a pretty easy game. You see Ahmad come on. You look at Newcastle, and I know there's links with kind of Shola and his family with Newcastle, and it just seems like it was the perfect game to be able to bring him on. Game's over. It kind of giving him that experience to say that he's made his Premier League debut. I agree with Alan. I think he'll mainly be with the under-23s. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get involved at some point in the Sociedad game, because it's the tie's over. But I think after that, you probably see him go back to the under-23s and give him a chance to play with this same team, because, like we've mentioned before, he hasn't gone longer than the season playing for one team, but he's an exceptional talent. I was surprised. At the start of the season, if you asked me who would have come through to play from the under-23s, obviously I would have said Ted Mengi. I thought he would have had a chance. But again, it's good that he's gone out on loan. But the other two would have been Puigmal and Hannibal Medjberry. I think those were the two that when Alan mentions, and he's completely correct, you need to dominate the under-23s to be ready for the first team. And every time I watch Hannibal this season, he dominates. And the thing is, I think he needs to get brought up whenever he comes back, because he's getting absolutely no protection in the academy games, where referees, the unfortunate part about under-23s and under-18 games is a lot of the flair players that are really good don't get any protection from the referees because they think they're showing off, when really it's just they're at a level that's just so much higher than the rest of the players there. So yeah, I didn't expect it, but look, it was great to be able to see him come on, and he was confident when he got on the ball. He didn't look like someone that was afraid to get on the ball, which is always good when you have like realistic. He's only turned 17, and for him to even get a chance to train with the first team is brilliant for him and his development. And it's a really good point about kind of trying to keep that family on side. Every team does it. We did it initially with Rafael and Fabio. We were buying them because we wanted to buy Rafael, and then it turns out that Fabio's pretty good as well, and they brought them in. And look, we know how interested United were in Jude Bellingham. So they've done this kind of not year after year, but when good talent comes around, they do try and kind of accommodate different family members to make sure that they do it. The difference with Shola is that he's an excellent player as well.
Yeah, obviously, Alan. Look, Ciaran makes a point there that look, when people like Donny van der Beek and Cavani get back to full fitness, we may not see Shola in the match day squad so much. But we have to caveat that with the fact that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is the coach, and if there's ever going to be a coach at Man United, especially in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, that understands the fabric of this club and the DNA, and will give you for chance. You look at all the names that have been in charge, you would say that Ole's probably the best to do that. Do you agree with Ciaran? Do you think that obviously when those players come back, we will see less of Shola, or can we expect to see him make some more appearances off the bench potentially, or even some of the other players from the academy come up and making some appearances off the bench? And does that depend maybe how far United go in Europe, for example?
I think, to be honest, based on, I suppose, the recent under-23 games, I think Hannibal is one who looks ready. As Ciaran says, he's dominating under-23 games.
Yeah.
I think Ahmad, clearly, I know he's technically a first-team player, but he's another one who looks far too good for that level. But I think, given the situation we're in with, obviously a number of titles to compete for, players to come back from injuries, I can't see too much more happening unless we draw someone in the Europa League like Lask or of that caliber, where we have an opportunity to blood a few guys. Hannibal would be the obvious candidate. I don't think Hugill will be picked just yet, just because of his age. And I think, obviously, Shoretire getting his debut might defy that, but I just think it probably wouldn't be best to give a number of guys just turning 17 their debut, because it might get to their head. But I think outside of that, it's interesting that Garner and Laird are doing quite well, it seems, on loan. I think if you look at the positions that United are looking to strengthen this summer, how well they do may impact our summer spend. So, for example, it seems that we're in the market for a more attacking right back to supplement Wan-Bissaka for maybe easier home games. But Laird potentially is that player. He ticks a lot of boxes. He's obviously had a lot of injuries, so it remains to be seen. But if he does well at MK Dons, I'd like to see him given a go. If the alternatives are as they are, which they don't seem to be, it's the likes of Trippier who's linked. I think
Max Harrens, I think, is another name, but you're talking 35 million. It's a lot of money. Like you say, Alan, you've already got it there ready-made in your academy, isn't it?
Well, I'd like to see him given a chance at least. Even if he's given the first 6 months or whatever. January is another transfer window that if we need to do that. Same with Jimmy Garner. It's a position that United probably look to strengthen. I heard earlier that there's some quote going around, I don't know, 100 million, If you look at Rice's trajectory and Garner's trajectory, if Garner is given the same opportunities, there's nothing to say that he won't be a better player, and he seems to be doing very well. I have a couple of good mates who are Forest fans and they're saying he's the business. What's key with he's actually been played in the holding role, whereas at Watford he seems to be played more advanced, and there was different systems. Obviously, a couple of coaches came and went, but he seems to be doing very well. So depending, I'd like to see both those players given a chance. A lot will depend on how Ole sees McTominay, whether he sees him potentially as a future 6 or whether he feels Matic has another season in him. But if the other options aren't overwhelmingly better, I'd like to see Garner given a chance. I think Garner and Laird are the two that I'd have my eye on in terms of breaking into the first team for next season.
No, absolutely spot on. And look, as much as we're talking today about the young players that are in the academy at the moment, the ones breaking into the first team, let's not forget all that talent that is out on loan at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah.
Tendon Mengi, Ethan Laird, Jimmy Garner. And I suppose we'll probably touch on those on the next show, Ciaran, when we do the second show.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll probably do like a loan report show where we'll look at how those guys have been doing on loan and sort of looking at the positions they're playing and how that might mirror United. Now, what I want to do now is, Ciaran, I want to move on to the striker situation, because obviously, look, someone who just sort of follows the scores and doesn't always watch the game, I seem to see United under-23s winning 6-3 each week, 4-2, and I'm seeing Hugill getting hat-tricks and scoring 4 goals, and I'm seeing Charlie McCann in the under-18 scoring. Is plenty of goals? You know what I mean? It's crazy. Like, when you just look at the scores, they seem to be scoring plenty of goals every week. But I want to sort of dig more into the fact about sort of the type of strikers that they are, Ciaran. And if you look at the type of strikers that they are, which you'll tell us more about, and how that sort of, if they are going to progress into the first team, are they the type of strikers that Ollie will want to use? If you compare them to the likes of Rashford, Martial, Cavani, do they have similar sort of traits?
Yeah, they're interesting. So the two players that I'll talk about are probably Joe Hugill, and you probably look at Charlie McNeill as well. He's mainly played in the under-18s. But look, we've mentioned a couple of things about Joe already, and the fact that where he came in, but he's played for both the under-18s and the under-23s, and the fact that he was already brought into the under-23s so early. I think he's played overall 20 games and has 16 goals. Look, the main thing about him is that he's a natural goal scorer, that he can score in so many different ways, and that he's composed. The one thing we spoke about recently on the show, Joe, is a striker having different ways to score, and it's not the same finish every single time. And that's what I see with Joe, is that there's so many different ways that he scores goals. Now, in terms of, like, I had a guy on when I was talking about Joe initially when he came through from the Sunderland Academy, and he actually wasn't the main target for Man United. It was Logan Pye, who they've also brought in, one of the defenders. But Joe was one of those kind of afterthoughts, but then a lot of teams came in for him, and you just look at kind of that Sunderland Academy, and you look at the kid Josh Maja from Fulham, who's had a really good couple of weeks. And Joe's kind of been at that level where everybody knew that he would be good enough to make it. The two traits that you look at is, I like his strength and I like his finishing. They're the two main ones. It's every time I see him get a chance to score, he tends to score. And that's what you want to see at that level, especially like Alan said, he's also only turned 17, so he's very young. I would love if with United getting him into a proper fitness program in the summer and getting him to build that kind of body mass, because he has the body to grow into, and it's a really important thing if he can do that. So if he can you look at how Rashford was able to kind of improve from one year to the next. You saw this kind of real scrawny winger, and then suddenly it's July or August and he's posting pictures and he looks like the transition that Cristiano Ronaldo made at United with his body. And that's kind of what you would like to see with Joe. And it's good because he has time to do that. Like we said, he's only 17. By the time he's like 19 or 20, you would expect that to start happening. I always hate kind of doing kind of, if you wanted to compare the striker to a pro, but I guess it's a good way for people that don't watch the academy to kind of see. And the one kind of style I like to see in him is kind of a light version of Harry Kane, the way he likes to play, because I think of that kind of the finishing that really, it looks like they're obviously the taller, not as quick as everybody, but they're not slow either. And that's what I see in him. And I guess one other important point is that for him being brought in, Solskjaer actually scouted him personally. So when United played against Sunderland in the under-18s last season, Solskjaer was at the game, and he was there to see Hugill because there was a lot of interest in him at the time. So that's also an important one. And I guess if you wanted to look at Charlie McNeill, he's not too different in terms of, I see these two strikers, and it's probably the two most natural finishers we've had at the club in a long time, which is very interesting when we talk about how the likes of Greenwood and Rashford have come through. Now, Greenwood still, I will still say that I think Greenwood's better in terms of at this point he was that good. And it goes to the point of, I guess, one thing that we could mention with when Alan said about Ethan Laird, he's another player that's a really good finisher. Before Greenwood came into the under-18s, Ethan was the top scorer. So it's another reason to have that. But I think these two at the same time in the academy and at a similar age group, like we saw Charlie kind of come up to the under-23s recently, and he got to play as well. So seeing both of these strikers at such a young age playing well for both the under-18s and under-23s, both I say are automatic finishers that when you get the chance, you expect them to score. And that's it. That's a big thing. And we've had that problem with Rashford when we've seen in the first team that when he gets that one-on-one chance, do you always expect him to score? I don't think so. But we've seen it with Greenwood that when he gets a chance, you expect it to hit the net. And that's what I get with Hugill and McNeill is when they get that opportunity, I expect it's going to be a goal. And I guess that's the best thing, that we want these strikers dominating kind of the opposition they're playing in now, but also give them time to develop that body. We've seen how hard it is for players coming through to actually be a striker for a top club. So I think, yes, it's brilliant that they're scoring lots of goals, but I think we also need to give them time and let them develop into the bodies that they're going to have over the next 2 to 3 seasons.
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on. Apologies, I think I might have called him Charlie McCann for some reason. I think I might.
There's a Charlie McCann as well, though.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, I'm getting me Charlie's all mixed up there. But Alan, just to come to you on the strike situation. I mean, obviously, we're fortunate in the current first team squad to have Mason there and Marcus Rashford, two young lads who have obviously come through the United Academy themselves. You know, if first of all, same question to you: how far do you think Joe Hugill can go, and also Charlie McNeill? But also, if they are to go far, how crucial will the likes of Mason Greenwood and Marcus Rashford, who trod that path, be to them in order for them to make that step up?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, if you look back at maybe the last 10 years, the best striker we've had at the club academy up until Greenwood was James Wilson, and I would have put my house on Wilson making it, and he's now struggling to get into the Salford team, I believe. You know, so it's very, very difficult. It's a very tough position to make it in. You know, if you look at the top 5-10 strikers in the world, we had one of them in Lukaku, and we didn't deem him to have enough qualities to fulfill the striker role for Manchester United.
Yeah.
Now, that's my concern in one sense with McNeill, is that he's a sniffer. You know, he's an old-fashioned sniffer. He lives for goals, Ruud van Nistelrooy type that, you know, most of his game involves the 18-yard box. But he'll need to develop a wider array. You know, he has plenty of time, obviously. He only turned 17 in September. But it's just the link-up play. There's a lot more that you need from a modern-day number 9 if you want to play the way that Solskjaer wants us to play. Hugill, I see a bit more of that. I see, you know, he has a more rounded game, in my opinion, than McNeill. And that's testament to that is the reason he's been progressed quicker to the 23s. He's had 14 appearances, 9 were starts, but he's got 10 goals in those. He's the second top scorer in the 23s league, which is really impressive. Yeah. It's up to them. How far they go is up to them. Harry Kane was mentioned as a very good example here, and in terms of comparison to Hugill. Kane was never an elite talent. You know, there was lots of, I don't think he started on his age grade at under 18 level. I think actually our own Will Keane was ahead of him, even though he was a year behind him. But Kane seemed to be a really hard worker. He applied himself, and that's what James Wilson didn't do, and it's what Federico Macheda before him didn't do. Greenwood seems to be quite a hard worker, but he has incredible natural talent, far more than any, you know, than Hugill, McNeill. You know, he's a different level also.
He's the biggest thing to come out of the academy for years, isn't he?
He was scoring, if you think the goals he scored for first team have been impressive. I mean, he scored a push-gas level goal every week for the academy. You know, and that's the bar. And there's, you know, he's one that's broken in because he's that good, but that's the level. You know, Hugill's been very, very impressive, far more impressive than I expected, but it's a very high bar to make it. You know, Lukaku, as I say, great output in terms of goals, didn't have enough of a rounded game. So it'll be tough. I don't want to, you know, dampen these lads' expectations, but that's the reality.
No.
So,
yeah.
You know, it's a challenge ahead of them. But, you know, as you say, they have Rashford to refer to and Greenwood, and in Solskjaer, that's the best manager possible to help them in that process.
Yeah, no, mate. I think it comes down to the old cliche, doesn't it? You get out what you put in, don't you? We talk about that in a lot of walks of life, and I think that's the case with professional footballers. Look, another name we could always talk about is the famous one is Ravel Morrison, isn't it? That, you know, another unbelievable United talent, but just didn't want to apply himself. Unfortunately, had other things going on in his life as well that obviously we won't get into today. But fascinating story. I think he's done some podcasts really, which are really worth listening to. Rio Ferdinand, but it's there. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't want to take it to the next level, you won't. The only thing I will say about these young strikers quickly is that, look, it looks like we may get Cavani for another season, Ciaran. I think positive that, he may stay for another year. Whether United look at that striker position this summer or whether they decide to kick the can down the road and leave it till next year, I don't know. But what that does mean if Cavani does stay is that it does give these strikers another year to sort of work at that under-23 level, prove themselves and sort of develop a bit more. There's no pressure for thinking that actually there's going to be a number 9 shirt available at United and it's all on them basically and we need them to come through straight away. There is a possibility that they will have another 1 or 2 years 2 years in order to continue their development at that level and to show their worth and see if they can make it.
Yeah, it's a tough one because one of the things that Alan said there that it really kind of resonates with me is that there's such a high level. You look at the player that Solskjaer wanted to bring in, and it was Erling Haaland, who he worked with, but he was a freak at a very young age, very much like we talk about Mason, that you just knew that he was going to be. Like if you saw Mason in any other league but the Premier League, I can guarantee you the amount of goals that he'd have already is ridiculous. The fact that he got the amount of goals last season that he did, it just shows you just how good he is. And the one thing that we mentioned today, Joe, is his all-round game has improved so much in the last 12 months. You look at Mason when he was scoring all those goals last season, you didn't see much else other than the finishing. And now you're seeing him turn into that creative player as well, that he's been the driving force to kind of getting goals, and it's been really, really good to see. The problem that I think Hugill and McNeill will have is, okay, maybe United don't end up getting the Erling Haaland because he probably goes to somewhere else, maybe it's Madrid or something like that. But that's the level that Solskjaer is looking for. And if you can't, but that's the point. It's like they want to get that level because that's the level you need to be able to win. And these players, it's a really good point that if Cavani is the main striker next season, they have a season to impress, to try and break through and play maybe in the EFL Cup, or look, like Alan said, that let's say things don't go well next season and we unfortunately play in a Europa League, or maybe we get a Champions League where one of the teams in our group is one of the poorer teams in the competition. That's when Ferguson used to bring in some of the players and give them a bit of experience, and that's probably it. They're going to have to show what they're worth, and it's difficult as a striker nowadays because, especially in the system that United plays, you have to be an all-round striker, but you also have to be a really good finisher. That's what the team are looking for. And look, we'll see over the next 2 to 3 seasons if they can make it. Look, the odds are that most likely only one of them will get the opportunity to do it at Manchester United, but I would be very surprised if both aren't in the professional game over the next kind of 5 or 6 years.
No, fantastic. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I'm looking forward to seeing whether something about strikers, and you always get more excited about strikers. I don't know if it's because they score goals, and that's obviously what we call like the business end of the pitch. But no, I'm really excited to see whether they do develop. And we've touched on it before, Ciaran. It's amazing that the amount of United Academy players that if they don't make it at United, they still go on to have careers at a pretty decent level, don't they? And that's, I suppose, another sort of big tick for the academy, the fact that just because you don't make it as a United player doesn't mean to say that you won't have a more than decent professional career somewhere else. Another really, really fantastic talent in the academy, Alan, is Arnold Poojman. I think I'm getting that right, my pronunciation. I was going Puigmal. Now he's slightly different in terms of, we know he's got all this amazing talent, but there is a link there with Barcelona. Ciaran, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that where he started out? Was he a Barcelona youngster, or?
I think it was. Espanyol, yeah.
Espanyol. So obviously, within that sort of Catalan area, Alan, there is some dispute over his contract at the moment at United, and whether United can tie him down or whether he sees his long-term future, obviously back abroad. What do you know anything about this at the moment? Are you following this? What do you think the odds are of him staying at United? And just tell us a little bit about his talent.
To be honest, I don't want to be. I've just put a dampener on the strikers. I don't want to put a dampener on this guy as well.
No, go for it. Yeah.
I think Hugill is a fantastic talent in case he comes back to bite me in the posterior.
We'll clip it up, mate. Don't worry.
Soundbite. But if Poojman, to be honest, I don't know if Poojman has enough to make it at United. That's my personal opinion. I've been wrong many times before. I've seen a lot better midfielders come through who haven't, and I think of the midfield crop, the one I'd be looking at that's currently in the 23s, I think that has maybe shown more to me in terms of, I suppose, where we need as well is Galbraith. I think he's impressed a lot. Right, yeah. Obviously, hopefully Garner does well on loan.
Yeah.
In terms of what Puigmal is, and again, I don't want to put it, and who am I to say, but he kind of came with the billing as a box-to-box midfielder, but he kind of doesn't have the physique to really fulfill that, I don't think, at Premier League level. And he kind of was shoehorned in at right back or right wing back for a lot of matches this season. Maybe testament to that kind of, they didn't see, I suppose, when you compare to, say, Mejbri, who does have the physical and, the fight and everything to be that box-to-box player. So the question mark over Puigmal is, what position will he end up? I'm not so sure what it will be. I don't think he has a physical capacity to be a box-to-box midfielder, personally. Right back, I think Laird's a far better talent, personally. So that's just, for me, I don't see him cracking out of those positions at United. Now, he might at Barcelona or elsewhere, and I might be proven very wrong, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, Ciaran, I know on shows and in the group chat you've talked about the contract situation a little bit. What's going on here, Ciaran? Does he not feel like he has a future at United? Is it a situation like Gomez where he probably feels he's not getting paid enough, or is it just a simple fact that he wants to go home, do you think?
It's a tough one. I don't think it's financial. That's one case, because look, United have always paid young talent that they believe in. Problem is, and this is a multi-layered discussion, because one, he's gone injured at really inopportune times. So right now he's injured when we're also seeing a lot of injuries in the first team, and during a time where we're playing Real Sociedad, where the game's pretty much over, and you could have seen some players like you've seen just yesterday. I think Ethan Galbraith was added to the Europa League squad, so you probably see him go over as well, and he might be on the bench, or he might get a couple minutes. And also, look, we mentioned it before, Jimmy Garner. He'll be the first one to be given that opportunity, I think, because he's earned it both last year at the academy level, but also he's played in the Championship pretty much the whole season, other than when Watford changed their managers. You have Dylan Levitt, who I'm not completely convinced by, because I tend to think if you're going to Croatia to try and get game time, it's a red flag. Great passer of the ball, has played well with Jimmy Garner, but again, you have to wonder. Ethan he's been one that's been, he's played internationally as well, so you have to put that into perspective. For Puigmal, it's one of those that I agree with Alan to a certain extent, where I don't feel like he has a specific position. He reminds me as like that positionless midfielder in the type of, when you look at Juan Mata, where you don't say he's a right winger, he's not really a central midfielder, doesn't really play as an attacking midfielder, and that's what I see Puigmal as. The problem is that there are a lot of Spanish teams that would like to bring him back, because creative wise, he's really good dead ball, which is important, especially in Spain. And I feel like there probably is an element that maybe he wants to go home. And the fact that Barcelona come calling, if Barcelona come calling, do I think he makes the Barcelona first team? Probably not. But it wouldn't shock me to see him play in La Liga, because I've seen other United players play I know that largely Ramazani went over to, I think it's Almeria, and he's been playing well. It's not the first division in La Liga. He's gotten to play and he's played quite well. And I would think more highly of Puigmal than I did with Ramazani, even though United wanted to keep him. So it's a real tricky situation, because do I think United would like to get a contract done with him? Yeah. I don't think it's a problem of them not wanting to do it. I just think that there are other teams interested, and I don't think, we mentioned it before in the podcast here, I don't think he's at that level where he's absolutely dominating under 23s. He's a good player, but the problem is when you don't have a specific position and you're not the main player and the main guy in your under 23 team, most likely you're not going to make it at Manchester United. We've seen other players leave and have had better careers than players that came up through United and then left afterwards. So he's going to be a real interesting, I think, case study over the next kind of 3 to 4 years to see what he does.
No, yeah, interesting. We're coming towards the end of the show, but I don't want to end without talking about a player that you guys have mentioned so much so far. And obviously, I think gathering from what you're both saying, he's probably the one you're most excited about, and that's Hannibal Medjberry. Obviously, a lad that's come over from France. Alan, I'll come to you first of all. Look, you look at Mejbri and what he has now. I know he will develop and he will probably become a completely different player as he gets older. But if you look at what he is now, does he offer United something if he continues in this way? Would he offer United something that they don't already have in the first team? And is that one of the reasons why you can see him sort of coming through? Or is he very similar to some of the players that we already have, do you think?
I think where Mejbri could be interesting is in the role Pogba was nearly playing, in kind of having that second creative player, but more as a box-to-box as a number 8. I think he would supplement Bruno. We've clearly missed Pogba the last few games. We're reverting to playing two more defensive-minded midfield players. And I think Mejbri can kind of help rebalance that if Pogba was to leave or if he was out injured. He can play as a 10 as well, but he's all action. I think to get the best out of him, you play him as a box-to-box.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is the way we currently set up at first team level is kind of an unstructured attack. Obviously, the pros being that it's very hard to plan against, but the cons being that if you're a player like Donny van de Beek, who seems to be very much one who has him up in Ajax in a structured team, it doesn't suit every player, but I think it would suit Mejbri. Okay. Because he plays off the cuff, he can come up with moments of magic the way we see Rashford and Bruno. It can be frustrating because there's no maybe set patterns of play that we'll see repeated the way City would score goals. But it would suit him. He's a street footballer, and I think that's the type of player that would suit the current United midfield.
No, absolutely. Ciaran, as a Manchester United fan yourself, I've heard you say a lot about Hannibal, and you've already said a few points during this show, but I suppose you're really excited about him, aren't you, and what he can bring in the future?
Yeah, I was so disappointed when I heard that the injury that he got with the under-23s, that he was out, because I'm convinced he probably would have been on the bench for the Real Sociedad game during the week. So it's just really unfortunate. But like I said, it goes back to the lack of protection he's gotten at the youth level and how he's ready now, I think, to make that step up. I mentioned it before. I think in terms of his natural ability as a midfielder, I think he's probably the best we've seen in the academy since the likes of Pogba and Morrison. It's really difficult to kind of say what style of player he could be or what he would compare to, but I just like how aggressive he is and how he's really not afraid. He's not like this, what we get, the typical aggressive midfielder. He's really creative as well. And like I said, it's one of those that he would play in the position of Pogba when Pogba wouldn't be there. That doesn't mean to say, and I don't want people to kind of get us wrong here, that doesn't mean if Pogba leaves in the summer that you just put Mejbri in. No, you need somebody else in there as well. But it means that you give him the opportunity to be able to do that as well. Like I personally like to, when he was younger, I used to watch Yuri Tielemans a lot. And he gave me in terms of his passing ability, it was very, very similar. But he's one of those that I think he has a really good chance to make it and stick with the first team. He's that good, and he seems to have the right mentality. He forgets when he makes mistakes in games, and he just kind of goes off and plays his game, and that's what I really like. It's like Alan said, it's kind of like backyard football, and it's something that is really nice to see, and you don't see too much of it with the under-23s. We've seen it over the last couple of years where the United team seem to get bullied when it comes to that level, but he's one that has really never backed down, and it's probably a reason you see him with a lot of yellow cards.
Yeah, no, absolutely spot on. Look, I think it's a great point you make, and look, we're going to wrap up now, but I think looking at these academy players as fans, when you see them doing so well, you want to get them in the first team. You want them to do well straight away, and you're so eager to see them. But you have to appreciate that this is going to be probably the biggest step in their career now, the next one that they're going to take to the United first team. And, you have to have some patience with them. And just because they're tearing it up in the under-23 doesn't necessarily mean that they'll do that in the first team. Give them time, give them patience. With the right coaching and mentoring, I'm sure that we'll see the ones that are meant to be in the first team really soon on a consistent basis. So like I say, that's all we've got time for today. Ciaran, thanks so much for joining me, mate. It's been really good to get your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's been great.
No, thank you. And Alan, obviously, first time I've worked with you, mate. It's fantastic to get your insight. Thanks so much for joining us, mate, and keep up the good work.
No problem, lads. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And like I say, thank you to everyone who's listening. This has been the Manchester United Academy project, brought to you by the Football Masterclass and the HallOfSportz podcast. Do go over to their YouTube channel, give them a like for loads of fantastic content, should I say, and we'll see you hopefully in a few weeks' time for the next episode of the Academy Project 21.